Now, let's return straight away to the news dominating today, the bomb attack in Manchester. I'm joined here in the studio by Olivier Guiter, who's an analyst at Global Strat, a security firm, and by Sasha Havlicek, the CEO of Institute for Strategic Dialogue, which looks at responses to violent extremism and conflict. Thanks to both of you for being here with us in the studio. Olivier, your headline thoughts, first of all, on an attack that quite deliberately targeted children.
Look, unfortunately, it's very unsurprising. That was an ideal target for Islamic State. It had the music factor. Music venues are major targets. It had, as you mentioned, children and teenagers. It was also a US singer, and it happened in the UK. So that's what they did at the Bataclan. They're trying to hit in one shot multiple targets, if you will. So, and they had made a clear, vocal message of targeting children and teenagers.
And Sasha, we've seen a return to the use of a bomb after a series of attacks in Europe and at Westminster using vehicles.
Absolutely. I mean, just to come back to this point, I think it's really important to remember that the objective of these attacks is essentially symbolic and political. However desperate the human cost, and the soft nature of this target is very important for us to remember, and therefore the response that we have in terms of a unified, resilient response matters intensely in terms of whether they succeed, because these attacks are as much about propaganda as they are about the impact in terms of
and responding to that, in your words, is absolutely crucial how we do that. So what is, in your view, the way to respond to something like this?
Well, building resilience at all levels, we need to get ahead of the curve on radicalisation in the first place, and that requires an all-of-community response, and we know that. But you raised an important point, which is that we've seen a spat of attacks of a low-level nature that don't require the kind of orchestration, the kind of planning that we've seen in earlier bouts of ISIS attacks across Europe, in the Paris attack, for instance, which was coordinated. And we've been told to expect more of that. I think security services will be very concerned at the use of explosives here. It suggests that this is a person that was either taught to make a bomb. It suggests potentially a connection, obviously, to Syria. It's very, very difficult to self-teach that sort of thing, although there's plenty of bomb-making manuals online. But it also potentially points to that kind of technician roaming around in the United Kingdom. Very, very worrying, because that suggests coordination of a sort that we haven't seen in a while now.
And Olivier, the police saying they know the identity of this person. I suppose the crucial question is they know it now, but did they know before in some way whether this person was on their radar somehow?
It sounds like they knew him beforehand. And if you can see in terms of the recent attacks all over Europe, 95% of the perpetrators were on some kind of list. In France, most of them were on security list. But the problem is, when you build lists like this, in France you have 15,000 jihadists. In the UK you have 3,000 potential jihadists that you have to surveil and monitor. It's impossible for security services to monitor that amount of people. So they have to make choices. They have to go on a hunch.
The former head of MI6 was saying, actually, the threat is greater than back at the 9/11 attacks, and we needed to be smarter. What is smarter when dealing with something like this and the nature of the threat?
It's to get human intelligence. I mean, the main issue is the UK and the US have bet the house on electronic intelligence for long years, and you have to go back to the basics. If somebody is not giving you ahead of time a heads up that this person might carry out an attack, it's almost impossible to find them. And the only reason why this attack on Whitehall a few weeks back was foiled is because security services got a tip from somebody close to the terrorist.
Sasha, a final thought. I mean, even as all three of us came in, we walk past every day potential targets. How do you go about safeguarding targets? Is it a reality that we simply have to live with this, finally?
Well, we've talked about the numbers. We've got a major challenge with thousands of individuals from across the West, from across Europe, going out to Syria and Iraq, hundreds already having returned. We talked about the challenge of dealing with encryption now in this space, the need for soft intelligence. Soft intelligence ultimately is about building relationships across communities, with families. The leakage in terms of information prior to attacks primarily comes from those sources, and that needs to be a major focus of all our efforts.
Sasha, we have to leave it there. And Olivier, thanks to both of you for coming in and talking through some of the enormous issues raised today. I'm joined now by Dr. Jennifer Wild, who's a consultant clinical psychologist at Oxford University. She specialises in post-traumatic stress disorder. Doctor, thank you for joining us here. In an attack like this, it's fair to say that the trauma extends way beyond those people who are there. Children all over the country will have been watching today the pictures and be deeply disturbed by what they've seen.
Exactly. I think the children obviously most affected will be the children in Manchester and close to where the attack happened. But of course, people hearing about it and kids hearing about it outside of Manchester and thinking about going to concerts will experience anxiety. But the most prominent problem to develop will most likely be post-traumatic stress or complicated grief reactions for the children involved and their families.
We haven't got long, but what should we say to children when they ask questions about this?
I think it's really important to focus on all the help that is being given to the survivors, and for those people who passed away to focus on the fact that their suffering is over, although their families will definitely be suffering, but to focus on all the help that the emergency services are providing, the schools and everybody in Manchester who have opened up their doors and helping the children. I think it's important to focus on that and what is being done. That will be helpful for children.
You also help parents whose children have been murdered. In terms of PTSD,